everyone, and welcome back to the latest edition of CouncilCast, the official podcast of the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers. I'm Katie Oberkirker on the Market Intelligence team here at the Council. Here with me today is Justin Oliver, the Senior Director of Business Development for Employee Benefits at CyberScout, and Anne Barron-DiCamillo, Vice President of Cyber Threat Intelligence and Incident Response at American Express. Today, they're going to be breaking down the cyber insurance landscape, including what's trending with respect to identity theft coverage and how cyber risk continues to evolve. Justin, Anne, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So I'd like to jump in with a big picture question and talk about the broad view of cyber insurance and what that landscape looks like today. Can you speak to the connection between cyber risk and identity theft protection? And I'll let you kick it off.
I'm sure. Thanks so much. Great question and great timing. I think when dealing with cybercrime in general, a great point of thought is an ounce of prevention is truly worth a pound of cure. Cybercrime in all of its many forms, from online identity theft, financial fraud, stalking, bullying, hacking emails, other kind of spoofing. There's just a ton of different ways in which we're seeing cybercrime today. At its best, it can wreak havoc in victims' lives through just major inconveniences and other kinds of annoyances. But at worst, it can really lead to some financial ruin and potentially really threaten your reputation and personal safety. So I think it's really wise to do as much as possible to prevent cybercrime up front, and that's where things like cyber insurance and other identity theft protections can really help be that pound of cure.
Great. Thanks, Anne. Justin, I'll let you add something.
Thanks. Yeah, I think, Anne nailed it on the head. There really is just a true correlation between cyber risk and identity theft. At the end of the day, a consumer can be safe and secure with all their information, but their information is probably still out there through a breach of, a Marriott or, something along those lines, where that identity theft protection, it's affordable, and, the amount of time and energy spent for an individual dealing with identity theft is really crippling. So to have an insurance in place that can help when the time comes, because it's no longer coming if, but when, is truly helpful for an individual to have that in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to focus on cyber insurance for a minute. Justin, can you speak to the evolution of identity theft, moving from a voluntary to an employer-paid product, and what do you think has contributed to that shift?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is the amount of time and lost revenue that employers are starting to see from identity theft. So the number is always changing, but right now the average time for an individual to deal with an identity theft is about 165 hours of work time. So from an employer standpoint, that's 165 hours of lost productivity. And they're also starting to see some absenteeism with workers missing, 5 times more than average when dealing with identity theft, and actually using, they're 4 times more likely to use their medical benefits. So it's really prevalent for the employer to start paying attention to identity theft, and, what can they do on the front end to not only help their employees, but get them back to work so, they can be productive and, there's not that lost revenue tied to it.
And some of those stats are interesting, and obviously employees do, in some ways, make their employer and the organization more vulnerable. What can employers do to prepare for future cyber risks when it comes to employee benefit offerings?
Well, I'll let Anne kind of talk about the cyber risk piece of that, because I think that's more up her alley. But I think, we've seen the shift to the employer paid from a voluntary standpoint. One of the things we're doing over at CyberScout is really trying to incentivize the employer to pay attention and provide these on an employer paid versus voluntary basis. So what we've been doing as a company is we're now providing breach services for any employer that pays for this benefit for their employees. So not only is it a win for the employees because they have this great coverage provided at no cost, but the employer now has the backing of CyberScout's breach team if anything were to happen, and it's embedded in those services. So we've seen a major shift from voluntary offerings to employer paid because of this, because it's really a win for both the employer and the employee. Now, it's not a true cyber liability product, and there's not something they shouldn't shy away from, but it's a pretty robust offering for the employer from a breach standpoint. But again, I'll let Ann kind of talk a little bit more about the cyber piece and what they can do.
I'm sure. So, I definitely agree that there's more offerings that we're seeing like that because the enterprises in every industry of all sizes are really finding themselves under this increasing barrage of cyber attacks. And at the same time, this threat landscape is just continuing to evolve. It's becoming more and more sophisticated, and it's happening at a faster pace year over year. And that means that many organizations are really struggling to keep up with that pace. And so offerings like Justin talked about are becoming more and more commonplace because it just becomes more and more difficult to buy down your capability just through security tools within your enterprise, and they're looking towards other offerings that can help protect their employees when they're at work and when they're home, because we're seeing an increase of targeting specifically of employees in their personal accounts, in their I would say more of their personal side of their lives through things like social media and stuff like that, where it's not targeting so much your enterprise-associated information, but it's going after an employee of a certain enterprise, going after their personal information, which is a lot of times that softer target, where a threat actor can be more successful in being able to breach that information because there aren't those security controls that are in place sometimes in larger organizations. Needless to say, the days are gone when a firewall alone will be sufficient to protect us against cyber criminals or other related groups. There's just this continued proliferation around connected devices, along with more flexible working practices, which is just compounding this complex partner ecosystem where we see organizations with the boundaries around organizations just ebbing and flowing. Threat actors are able to leverage all of this with malicious intent and take advantage at a very alarming rate to increase cost to businesses because of this porous network boundaries that we're seeing and how threat actors are shifting towards softer targets, meaning personal accounts of their employees.
So, Ann, like you said, these attacks are happening at a more rapid pace and they're becoming more sophisticated. So given that the cyber risk landscape is constantly evolving, as a cybersecurity expert, how are you working to scale these types of strategies on a global level?
Great question. I think it's continuing to look at the existing capabilities, or really looking at your risk posture and making those risk decisions associated with the ever-evolving changes in your landscape. So you have to kind of understand what risk tolerance level you have first as a business. And then from there, you can start to look at the evolving landscape to see where you might want to make some new investments based on what is the highest risk to your specific organization. I think one of the things I've seen in my 20-plus years working in technology and cyber is that there's no single solution for any enterprise, and so you have to understand what the risks are specific to your organization and then apply the specific controls to buy down that risk. We can't buy down every risk. There's no zero ability or zero getting to 100% lockdown infrastructure. I mean, unless you're just not on the internet, which is not really an option for many small and medium-sized businesses and large corporations today. So I think it's understanding your risk posture specific to the risks or to the threats that are targeting you, focusing on those things first. I think there's a prioritization, too, that we need to focus on. I think I see a lot of times organizations try to boil the ocean and address everything, and that's just not applicable either. I think you need to really prioritize your capabilities and controls to the risks that buy down those threats that are more targeted to you or your organization in general. And then also I think the other thing I see a lot of times that organizations struggle with is this ever-increasing noise that comes from threat intelligence or alerts that really can become a distraction. And so I think there's an aspect of really understanding, really trying to dial down the noise so they can focus on the alerts that matter and prioritize those alerts for resources to address. I think more data isn't always a good thing in cyber, and so being able to find the dirty needle in a stack of needles is really important. Being able to focus and prioritize your resources to the things that are going to help buy down that risk. It becomes that kind of cyclical review. It's not something you do once a year and you put the plan away. It's got to be looked at on a continuous basis with a lens towards where the threat environment is evolving.
Absolutely. And just to follow the thread of this topic, what recommendations can you give some more mid-size employers to better protect and educate their employees when it comes to cyber risk and identity theft?
Definitely a security training program that's done on a continuous basis to your employees. I mean, if you think about it, where you see threat actors having the most success is through phishing campaigns. So the delivery of the malware or either through the link or through an attachment to the inbox. All it takes is one click for that malware to be able to execute in your environment. So I think ensuring that you have a security program in place where you're educating your employees. I think taking security out of just the IT department and making sure that it's part of the enterprise is really important. It's everybody's responsibility. It's not just the information technology or information security personnel, but it's the responsibility of the entire organization. That also means that you have executive leadership support for cybersecurity programs. So those two things in combination, that continuous education to all of your employees with the support of your executive leadership for cybersecurity practices, resources, and this program. I think understanding the way to prevent a cyber event across the organization becomes critical in order to buy down your risk. I also think that, like I said earlier, there's not a silver bullet or a solution that works in any one enterprise. I think you have to look towards more defense in depth capabilities and ensuring that you have a laundry list of security controls that will help buy down the risk for your specific organization. Our lives are becoming increasingly digital, which puts us more into harm's way. And the fact remains that bad guys will continue to find new and ever expanding but easily accessible online technologies to steal, harass, and commit all kinds of crimes. So you need to ensure that your footprint associated with your environment is staying ahead of that you're educating your employees, you're looking at a defensive depth capability to include preventive and proactive capabilities like cyber insurance and other identity theft protection.
Definitely sounds like a one-size-fits-all solution is not the best approach, just considering, how quickly the risk landscape is evolving. Justin, I want to switch gears here and focus on CyberScout for a moment. As more carriers begin to emerge in this space, what are some of the most important factors that a client should consider when they're thinking about choosing a carrier to work with?
Yeah, definitely. There definitely has been a lot of new carriers entering the space. There's been a consolidation of some larger insurance carriers, picking up some ID theft carriers. So, at the end of the day, we're all monitoring very similar information. So I think there's a couple of key components that, when employers are looking at adding this, they should really concentrate on. First being, working with a carrier that specializes in identity theft. With the consolidation and the new additions, there can sometimes be competing interests when the carriers are trying to do more than identity theft as a product. So it's really important to work with a carrier that's their primary focus and they specialize in. So the job is going to get done and it's going to get done right and quickly. Talking kind of along the lines of also the overall security of the company, I think is extremely important because you're thinking about a company that is holding your employees' PII, anything from their bank account information to their credit cards to their Social Security, not only for that employee, but for their family members. So making sure that the overall security of that company that you're partnering with is, the highest industry standard is extremely important. And something that actually often gets lost that we've seen in these presentations that we're doing is the resolution component. At the end of the day, the monitoring is extremely important, but the resolution is the primary thing that an employee signs up for, that when, Rome is burning and they've had their identity stolen and they need help, who they turn to. And so that's a really key component of these policies. And how do you partner with a carrier? And what we're seeing is that some of these carriers are requiring individuals to sign power of attorneys, which adds a lot of time to the resolution process, where, at CyberScout, we can start working for that individual right away with no power of attorney due to our long-standing history with the credit bureaus and just where we're located in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's really helped us resolve employees' identity theft a lot quicker. And then from the insurance standpoint as well, there's a lot of carriers out there, and we have very robust insurance policies, and they're a reimbursement model, but making sure that there's not caveats in the insurance and really diving into that to make sure that an employee will actually be paid out on these insurance policies. So there's no limits on unauthorized electronic fund transfers. There's no limits on 401ks or HSA payments, or the policies don't need to be actively monitored in the system in order for payouts to occur. So it's really important to really understand the insurance component, and a lot of our broker partners are really starting to dive into that and pay more attention to that. And then the last, what we've also started to see is, as this has developed and become more and more popular, is having a partner that can provide a benefit to not only your international employees, but protecting those employees that work in the U.S. and are traveling internationally if something were to happen, that they have access to those benefits. So really making sure that this is not just that you can only use this benefit inside the U.S. is becoming more and more popular amongst the broker community and some of the clients that we're working with.
I want to finish up here by just posing a bigger picture question. I'll start with you, Justin. The insurance industry has been known for its protective data posture. So what do you think is the future of identity theft with respect to data?
Yeah, what I probably see happening is that the cyber risk and the identity theft are going to start to be sort of a combined offering. Right now, we're talking to two different sides of the house. You have your IT folks that are concerned about the overall cyber, and then you have the C-suite and the HR team that are really concerned about protecting their employees' identity. So I think over time, what we're going to see is those two sides merge together. So we're pretty excited. We just rolled out a cyber liability product. Again, more geared towards the P&C producers because they're having different conversations. But what I think is going to happen over time is that the cyber liability and the identity theft offerings are going to be combined, to get better discounts, to make it more easier for the employer to just kind of have one policy under one roof that not only protects the overall security of their company, but the security of their employees' identities. So that would be kind of what I would see happening in the next few years from my end. But I'm sure Ann has more insight on that as well.
Yeah, I would just add, there's all different types of identity theft that we're seeing today, and there's just going to be a continuation of creativity associated with that. I think there's just a range of opportunistic amateurs that are working independently with teams to more sophisticated, what I would consider to be more hardcore professionals that are systematically targeting different groups of victims. These include everything from internet hackers to sometimes trusted full-time employees. It could be a temporary employee or even an outside service. It could be organized crime, amateur thieves again, and sometimes it's even friends and relatives. One thing that we do see with identity theft is usually the person who stole the information is not the person who uses it to commit fraud. A lot of times there's a number of players that are involved in identity theft. And so there's a whole, entire network of individuals that can be involved in how the identity of the individual is stolen and leveraged for multiple components associated with fraud. So I would just say that will continue to become more complex, and that there's an entry of more threat actors into this space because it is a very lucrative aspect of monetizing cybercrime for these actors. So it's not going to go away. It's going to continue to attract more, I would say, more individuals into this because of the lucrative aspect associated with the outcomes and the payouts. There'll be more commodity as a service associated with identity theft, meaning that more sophisticated actors can even sell the capabilities in which they use to scrape and to steal information, and which means that there's even more players in this space associated with this. So I think we'll continue to see identity theft rise, and we'll continue to see different aspects of how that data is used to commit fraud in more and more creative ways.
Thank you, Justin and Anne. I really appreciate your time and your insight and expertise on this. And thank you all for listening to CounselCast. You can listen more on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or SoundCloud. Please subscribe and leave us a review or rating to tell us how we're doing. If you have any questions or comments for us, you can find us at ciab.com, at the CIAB on Twitter, or you can email in at counselcast@cib.com. See you next time.